Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Monday, and today I am joined by Linda Tran, who I am meeting for the first time this morning, although you did the show last week. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Great to have you.
Well, it's been an exciting couple of days, as you know, and I'm sure you have many thoughts about it, so let's get started. What's on your radar, Robby?
Happy to tell you. Well, President Joe Biden is furious at Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg for announcing last week that Facebook and Instagram would no longer employ fact-checkers with the power to censor content they disagreed with. Biden said, "The truth matters," and he was outraged that this could happen in America. Take a look.
I know I'm on national television, but you all are local reporters and national reporters. I'm not, this is not a real question, but what do you think? You think it doesn't matter that they let be printed where millions of people read it, things that are simply not true? I mean, I don't know what that's all about. It's just completely contrary to everything America's about. We want to tell the truth. We haven't always done it as a nation, but we want to tell the truth. And the idea that, a billionaire can buy something and say, by the way, from this point on, we're not gonna fact check anything. And when you have millions of people going online, reading this stuff, it is, anyway, I think it's really shameful.
It can be pretty difficult to follow the president's train of thought, unfortunately, but let me see if I understand him. Biden said Zuckerberg's decision to disempower left-wing activist organizations who have for years policed dissenting speech from independents, conservatives, and libertarians was, quote, completely contrary to everything America is about. On the contrary, Mr. President, what America is about is the First Amendment. America is about free speech and free expression, about the freedom of the American people to criticize their government, to disagree with their government, to speak out against their government and its policies. What makes America unique is that unlike many other countries in the world, we do not allow federal bureaucrats to dictate to us what we are allowed to say and to think. Free and open discussion, including discussion of ideas that are controversial or even hateful or wrong, is an obvious and fundamental component of free speech. Biden could not be more misinformed about Zuckerberg's decision. What was anti-American, was the Biden White House policy of browbeating social media companies into censoring political content about the origins of COVID, the Hunter Biden laptop story, and so many other subjects. It was Biden's treatment of dissenting citizens' free speech rights that is completely contrary to everything America is about. Biden is not the only one to misunderstand this, however. Last week, in the wake of Zuckerberg's decision to end their gravy train, the International Fact-Checking Network, did you know there was such a thing? They held an emergency meeting to counter Zuckerberg. As I explained on Rising last week, his decision to fire the fact-checkers is long overdue and hugely positive, in my opinion, for everyone who would like the platform to take a more hands-off approach to the moderation of political speech. Fact-checkers, of course, very much do not put themselves in this category. They are furious that their expertise is being questioned and that their power to censor speech will be taken away. They are so furious that they're actually attempting to argue that they never held this power in the first place. "We did not and could not remove content," wrote Lori Robertson, managing editor of Meta fact-checking partner factcheck.org. "Any decisions to do that were Meta's." This is misleading, or to put it in parlance that factcheck.org might understand, this claim is missing important context. The deal was that Meta would pay certain fact-checking organizations to monitor the platforms and would then take action to limit the spread of content that was deemed false. The fact-checkers knew they had policeman powers, albeit indirect ones. That's why they were well compensated by Zuckerberg. According to Business Insider, payment by Meta itself was their, quote, predominant revenue stream. Fact-checking isn't going away, and many robust organizations existed before Meta's program and will continue after it, said Angie Holan, director of that international fact-checking network. But some fact-checking initiatives were created because of Meta's support, and those will be vulnerable, end quote. Good riddance. In the years since fact-checking became an important aspect of Facebook, the platform has stagnated. 4 years ago, Meta deprioritized political content on the Facebook timeline. The purpose, according to Meta, was to make it easier to interact with friends and family while avoiding fraught news topics. Instead, what has happened is that the platform is now overrun with useless junk. A lot of it AI-derived or something along those lines. If Zuckerberg wants to restore the platform to its former glory, I say that's great. And if the fact-checkers won't be along for the ride, even better. So I think, Linda, we are about to make Facebook great again. That's what's happening here.
Wow, I feel like I understand where you're coming from, Robby. However, there is some important context that we should also put into this discussion, in my humble opinion. First of all, misinformation and disinformation are actually a really significant problem. Like, you may not believe that it is Meta's responsibility to address it, but look no further than Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton and the type of misinformation and disinformation that really harmed the ability of first responders to get to the people they were trying to help, because they were being inundated by individuals who believed the misinformation and disinformation they saw online, thinking that they were there to harm them instead of help them. So I think we do have to level set that it is a real and significant challenge.
Well, these groups can still be active on the platform saying why they think these things are misinformation and engaging in setting the record straight, as occurs in opinion journalism. But would you not concede that, I mean, in several cases that I've discussed previously on the show, they flag things as, misinformation or misleading, but then they're misleading, or it's a debate the extent to which, for instance, extreme weather events, are they getting worse? How caused by climate change are they? Is wildfires because of that, or is it because of forest management? I mean, some of these are topics that are of legitimate debate, and these were activist groups, in my view, putting their thumb on the scale, saying, there's no debate about this, we are asserting it is this true. Well, that's like your opinion.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and defend whatever individuals they had, quote unquote, policing the content. But I do think we also need to recognize it's not really apples to apples here. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, in the situation in the hurricane response, you had really, really compelling fake imagery of things like a little girl afloat on a raft left alone by first responders, which mm-hmm. were deliberately created to mislead and to misharm. And that's not the same thing as having a conversation like you and I are having right now, which is words and balanced. But, these things are very dangerous.
Are you active at all on Facebook? Is that a social media platform you partake in?
Well, so the funny thing, Robby, is Facebook was my true introduction into social media. Yeah. I'm older than I look.
Same.
and I reserve it really just for family interactions. Yeah. But those debates that are happening on what's now X, Instagram, other places, I am paying attention.
Yeah, it's just the quality of the user experience on Facebook has, in my view, just degraded horribly over the years. I'm not very involved on Facebook anymore, because if I log on and I scroll through it, it's mostly like ads or weird AI-generated yes. like pop culture information lists, or just like clips from shows I like. It's like I don't actually see content. I don't see political content very often, and I don't even see content from like friends and family very much. It's just it's kind of a weird muck. So I really hope they go back. I know nobody liked when it was a platform for provocative political news, but like now, I think even from a mainstream liberal standpoint, it's just nothing now. It's just useless.
Well, again, I use it to share photos of my kids, so maybe my bar is a little bit lower. But I do think, the point that you're making, the content used to be better, but in part because they were allowed to do things like very, very specifically target every single individual who was opening up that app and giving them, serving them exactly the information they thought they wanted.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what they're serving me with now. Weird, like Lord of the Rings facts you don't know, which I already know because I know all of the Lord of the Rings facts. Thank you very much. Tell us what you think about this topic. We will be again discussing Mark Zuckerberg and his changes to Facebook. He had some interesting things to say about that in a recent appearance with Joe Rogan. You won't want to miss that. We'll discuss it. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this. A political firestorm over the California wildfires is blazing hot and shows no sign of tamping down.
Some on the right are blaming California leadership, while others on the left say there's a lot of mis- and disinformation going around.
Let's start with LA Mayor Karen Bass. A new report from the New York Times titled, "Before Taking Office, LA's mayor said she would not go abroad," details Karen Bass's promise to focus on her city and not travel out of the country as much as she did while she was a member of Congress. In a 2021 interview with The Times, Bass said that if she were elected mayor, quote, "Not only would I of course live here, but I also would not travel internationally. The only places I would go would be D.C., Sacramento, San Francisco, and New York in relation to L.A." The Times continued writing, a review of her public daily schedule for the past year shows that Ms. Bass has traveled out of the country at city expense at least 4 other times in recent months before this Ghana visit, which of course took place as the wildfires began to rage. One of those visits was to the President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum's inauguration. The other 3 were to France for the Olympic Games in Paris in 2024.
Meanwhile, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is calling out Elon Musk. On X, Newsom posted a clip of Musk talking to a fire command team. The governor said the firefighters, quote, exposed Musk for his own lies after Musk asked the firefighter if water availability was the issue.
Here's a part of that clip.
All right. What about water availability? Was water availability? I understand that was like not an issue in Malibu. Is that correct?
Was it water?
Well, yeah.
So there was water. We have several reservoirs and casinos that we use a lot. Now, just an example, if we have one building burning,
Mhm.
we could flow 1,000 gallons a minute on that one building with the hose lays that we put in
Yeah.
to stop it. You can imagine 1,000 gallons per house we couldn't do, right? So the amount
Yeah.
of water we're flowing, there really is no water system that's going to keep that pace. So we have to bring in water tenders, which are these big tank water tanks that, 2,500, 3,000 gallon
Yeah.
trucks, and they'll come in. And that's what we have to do to compensate. So they park out there, do it. DWP did a great job. They brought in big water
Okay.
trucks for us,
All right.
and we use them as basically mobile hydrants.
In Malibu along the coast, there was no shortage of water. In the Palisades, there was a shortage of water at a certain point. Or is that not accurate?
Well, we were
Okay.
flowing just an amount of water that the system couldn't overbear. That we're just
Okay.
overbearing.
Newsom did order an investigation last week into dry hydrants.
Then, of course, we have President-elect Donald Trump.
Trump last week claimed that Biden had left him no money in FEMA. While FEMA's disaster relief fund did deplete last year, Biden signed a bill to try to replenish it.
A CNN fact check on Trump's claim noted that even if the money might prove to be inadequate, Biden still actively tried to help raise the fund.
Last week, Trump also claimed Newsom failed to sign a water restoration declaration that would have allowed millions of gallons of water to flow into many parts of California. Newsom's press office said that was false, writing at the time, quote, "There is no such document as the Water Restoration Declaration. That is pure fiction." The governor is focused on protecting people, not playing politics, and making sure firefighters have all the resources they need.
Trump did try to implement a plan in 2020 to deliver more water to farmers in the Central Valley, but California's AG countered Trump with a lawsuit claiming he was failing to protect endangered fish species. Trump's team says this is what the president-elect was referring to.
CNN's fact check noted that Trump's federal initiative wasn't something for Newsom to, quote, sign.
That sounds like it's starting to get into the weeds a little bit for who's telling the truth, and that in fact there was a plan to redirect this water that was scuttled by concerns for this fish. But look, I'm sure exaggerated claims have been made by the people on the right trying to blame all of this on Newsom, and the reverse is also true of Newsom trying to blame like any and all criticism of Democratic administration of the state on like misinformation or things are not being. Look, the fact remains, LA is on fire. Thousands of people have lost their homes. People have died. This is not. We can't just look at this and say, well, what a successful example of good governance. Like this is not good. This was not bad. They were now maybe it's not been a catastrophe and they've handled this natural disaster as best they could, but I think you are perfectly fair to say, well, could it have been done better? Could we have had more safeguards in place? And certainly could the mayor of the city have kept her promise to like not leave the city except for very important and political relevant trips to DC or Sacramento? She was in Ghana, and she has also traveled despite making that promise. So that seems like not a misinformation to criticize that.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that's misinformation. We're literally just talking about what happened there. I do think that what people are raising is that maybe this isn't the moment to treat this like political football. People are still losing their lives on a daily basis. Thousands more structures are under fire, and even the fires themselves, as we heard, they've made some progress, but now they're really fearful because the winds are going to pick up again, and they expect things to get significantly more worse before they get any better. So I think it's more a question of timing. Universally, I think people of good conscience and logical people would think it's a good idea to look into what actions were taken before, during, and after.
Yeah, the whole don't politicize a tragedy thing. I don't know. It sounds good to me on paper, and I kind of agree with that. And I certainly think just like spouting off about like, oh, was there enough water here? Was there not enough water here before we don't know? And I also would not just take government officials' word for it that there was plenty of water here and we did nothing right. We did everything appropriately. Like, oh, okay, well, everyone is going to try to cover their own behavior, so let's investigate these things fully. But I'm good with, as people's homes are still smoldering, if we try to have like a loftier conversation, not immediately go into partisan screeching talking points, that does sound good to me, although I don't really think, would you even think that, say that Democrats always abide by that rule when there's like when there's a mass shooting or something? They mock Republicans for saying don't politicize the tragedy, right?
Well, absolutely. And I would love the same criticism both directions.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing to say you disagree on a policy basis and to talk about the substantive things that you would want to change, but I think we're really devolving here into a little bit of a playground fight, a cafeteria food fight, and I think the underlying pretext of all that is that everybody's also looking ahead to 2028. Governor Newsom is one of those people whose names have been floated, and I think that there's some other stuff.
Do you think there's really, you someone who understands Democratic politics better than I do, I think, is there a genuine appetite for a Gavin Newsom among either grassroots people or is it other people in the Democratic Party or Democratic leadership? I feel like Gavin Newsom is an idea that's been pushed on me by a kind of Democratic-aligned mainstream media, but I could be wrong. But maybe he is a really well-liked figure. Conservatives obviously despise him, and I think would be happy for him to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party because he is, to our mind, very loathsome. But that might not be how he is viewed among Democrats.
Well, I'll tell you this, Robby. Yeah. 25 years of doing politics and policy, and I can say with confidence it is far too early to actually talk about the field for 2028 and what people are.
No, it's never too early. Are you kidding? That's no fun. What else are we going to talk about? All right. Well, we'll have to wait to see on that then. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance's comments on Fox News Sunday about the January 6 defendants has caused a bit of a stir. Let's watch.
January 6 pardons, President Trump says there's a process. Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
Some on the right are now blasting Vance for his comments. January 6 defendant and free speech activist Philip Anderson, for instance, took to X and wrote, J.D. Vance wants to betray the J6 defendants. He wants their suffering to continue. J.D. is saying that unless a J6 defendant is innocent of literally everything, that they should keep suffering. He doesn't give a damn about us.
YouTuber and former litigator David Freiheit jumped in, writing, wrong, J.D. Vance, pardon them all. The process was constitutionally contaminated for each and every January 6 defendant, even the ones who committed, quote, violence, assuming that the violence wasn't provoked with excessive police brutality, which it was, Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boyland, etc. Vance took to X defending his position, writing, first of all, I donated to the January 6 Political Prisoner Fund, got roasted for it during my Senate race. I've been defending these guys for years. Second, there were federal informants in the crowd. Did they get a pardon? I don't think so. The president saying he'll look at each case, and me saying the same is not some walk back. I assure you we care about people unjustly locked up. Yes, that includes people provoked, and it includes people who got a garbage trial. So I think I agree with J.D. Vance, and he's just said exactly what Donald Trump said. The media has tried to, in my view, fabricate this idea that Donald Trump is going to do blanket pardons for everyone who participated in January 6th. He has never said that. He said we're going to be looking at the cases again, one by one. If there are cases of people who've been, A, overcharged or wrongly charged, or have already been in prison for a long time and are not really a danger to the community, I think pardons or maybe commutations would be perfectly appropriate. If there are people serving time or who have not yet served time for violent crime or for fighting with the police or for smashing windows or for defacing people's offices, they should, my view is they should be charged and serve a sentence that is responsive to the gravity of that crime. Some of that is less so, some of that is more so. They're going to be looked at a case-by-case basis, and that's all fine.
My view is the moment you cross that threshold, regardless of what you did, you're in a perilous position, and especially because January 6th led to multiple deaths, obviously was a dark moment in our nation's history. It's problematic if you entered the premises. That said, what I think is really interesting about this clip is J.D. Vance himself. This is the magic of the incoming vice president. Regardless of the substantive debate to be had over the January 6th defendants, he's making everything sound extraordinarily reasonable. And I think what we're going to see over the coming months and years is J.D. Vance rolled out time and again in a way that he can explain things to a broad swath of Americans in a way that sounds like, that makes a ton of sense to me. What's interesting, Robby, is this actually reminds me of my former boss in the same way that Pete Buttigieg was often deployed to media outlets that one might not think a sitting Democrat would want to go on. He did so in a very rational and well-received way because of the way he speaks. And I don't think it's an accident that both of these gentlemen are, Midwesterners with a certain way of talking and a certain way of connecting.
Fellow Midwesterners. I think you're absolutely right that both Buttigieg and Vance are effective surrogates for their ideological factions and their parties, particularly on cable news. J.D. Vance did a really good job during the campaign of making the case for Trump. He was not my first choice for VP because we have some ideological differences, but I was really blown away with how effective he was at messaging Trumpism. He obviously did very, very well at the debate that even Tim Kaine admits is not his strong suit. I don't think Tim Kaine necessarily has a huge future in Democratic Party politics.
Tim Walz.
Who I know. Tim Walz.
Yes,
Tim Kaine has no future in...
Two Tim VP nominees.
Yeah.
Yes.
You think you would have learned something from picking a forgettable Tim first time around, and they did it again. But yes, Vance is very good at this and will continue to be doing it, I think. And I don't think too many conservatives are actually going to be mad at him. There were a couple people there on Twitter who were mad at the walk back for January 6th. I don't think a huge issue for the conservative movement, for the MAGA movement, is having universal pardons for everyone, who, because again, including, I agree, if people trespass, now they should get a crime. They should be charged with trespassing. They should not be charged with terrorism or seditious conspiracy or any of those exaggerations that got foisted on some of them. I absolutely support commutation, for instance, for the people, the Proud Boys leaders who weren't even there and who got 20 years for terrorism. So there are some cases of excessive sentencing, certainly, but it's not that we're going to pretend January 6th wasn't bad or it was perfectly fine to barge in the Capitol and destroy things. But what matters to MAGA is reforming the Justice Department, the weaponization of law enforcement, and making sure that people's free speech and civil liberties are not violated.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I do think we need to keep our eye on comments like they were very fine people and the insinuation that somehow the acts that were committed on January 6th were acts of patriotism. I think it's super problematic for all Americans if we go that route.
Yeah, it's not, although... Well, it's 99% of the people there, right, were engaged in a First Amendment protected protest. They did not, and if you didn't enter the Capitol, you can wave signs, you can be vocal, you can say whatever you want. I didn't agree with the cause they were there supporting, but they have the right to do that. And then the minority of people who did participate in a riot, absolutely, crime is crime. I show no no desire to go soft on them or any other rioters. I lived in D.C. and all the windows were smashed by left-wing people and then by right-wing people, and I have no patience for any of it, and we need to reassert law and order because we can't have that happen.
Right.
More Rising right after this. Stay tuned.
Vice President Kamala Harris hasn't quite ridden off into the sunset yet. A photo shared by Kamala Harris from the vice president's official social media handle featured 3 Democrats prominently. It showed President Biden, former Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. President-elect Donald Trump, however, is blocked behind a pillar in the image.
Petty stuff. Meanwhile, the Veep has still been asking donors for money. Yes, she is still fundraising, according to Politico, and that is making many in the Democratic National Committee quite angry. Per reports, the Harris Victory Fund did not seek donors' explicit approval to keep charging them after the November 5th election. The email sent by the Harris Committee says they would continue charging the donors until you contact us to stop it. There's an expectation that campaign committees should shut down recurring donation once their bid for office ends. That clearly didn't happen in this case. Was it intentional? Politico reporter Daniel Lippman posted, quote, "Scoop, 2 months after Kamala Harris's defeat, the Harris Victory Fund she set up with the DNC still charging monthly recurring donors. It's silly, out of touch, and needlessly takes advantage of our most loyal supporters," one Dem operative told me. It seems like there's been a lot of controversy over the spending that the campaign has done. We heard reports previously of vendors not necessarily getting what they were promised, and sort of high-profile people being brought in for the interviews and the endorsements receiving some money, although maybe that was intended for the vendors. But what's going on with still charging people for a campaign that's no longer the lost?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's set into context what you do when you run a presidential campaign, especially in the modern post-Barack Obama era.
You ask for people for money.
You ask people for money because your campaign budget is set at about $1 billion, maybe a little bit more. And then your job as campaign leadership is to bankrupt a $1 billion organization. So it's a little bit of a dance going, running through the tape through election day. And then typically what happens is you try to spend as much as you can, and you still have some bills to pay when all is said and done. Now, all of that being said, it sounds like this is a campaign that raised astronomical sums of money, and in a very, very short time. A lot of that came during those last 100 days when Kamala Harris was at the top of the ticket. And as far as we know, she had somewhere close to $2 million cash on hand at the end of November. So I think part of what's happening is people feel like they really, really gave a lot, and they're wondering where that went at the very end here. And even if you have the fine print that says you can opt out at any time, I'm not terribly surprised. And I'm not terribly surprised people are upset. They're disappointed. Some donors in particular may feel like they're heading into, this is certain people's opinions, a very dark period with the incoming administration, and this is sort of adding insult to injury.
Yeah, recurring payments are notoriously annoying to try to cancel.
In the private sector.
You probably have this experience where you look closely at your credit card statement and go, wait, what is this? I'm still paying for
I've got 2
Showtime? I don't watch anything on Showtime. What is this?
Exactly.
So it's it's not exactly surprising or unique to Kamala Harris. What did you think about that photo there? The clipping, that seems intentional to me.
Oh, 100% intentional,
Yes.
and absolutely not surprising, right? You would expect that you're going to, for your own social media account, frame it however you want to. And I'm not terribly surprised the angle was what the angle was, and the individuals who were highlighted were those.
But they were all, some people were all getting along well there, right? I think many of us observing the Carter funeral and reacting to it on social media were struck by the amount of friendliness between Donald Trump and Barack Obama. There was a lot of they were seated next to each other, a lot of them chatting in friendly terms. I don't think we specifically saw Kamala and Trump interact, although they might have interacted off screen.
Might have been
who
off
knows?
the angle, yeah.
George Bush gave Barack Obama the
belly tap.
We
Who
loved
didn't like
the belly
tap?
Yeah. So it was it's funny to see all these characters like seated next to it. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Mike Pence, Al Gore isn't, we don't see the Republicans and the Democrats all together so often. So it is always interesting to see. But they seem to all be kind of treating each other respectfully, et cetera. So
But
I don't
maybe
know
with
how
the
I like
exception of
Kamala
Karen
Harris.
Pence, though. And
What did she do?
So she didn't greet Donald Trump, and she didn't stand up when he came in, nor barely even look him in the eye. That was of note as well.
But of course, maybe she might have done it off camera, right? Because Barack Obama and Donald Trump didn't shake hands on camera, but they were talking. They clearly had said hello to each other beforehand. So I don't know. So it was. What I saw a lot of reaction from on this point was like, if you were, how can you assert, as some Democrats did, that this is Hitler, this is fascism, etc., and then you just chat politely with them at a public event. It makes people think maybe you weren't sincere in that criticism.
Perhaps, but my view is that one should be really civil, especially at the funeral of a former president. And I worry that our standards have gone so low that we're thrilled when we see people interacting in a polite way in an environment like that.
So back to the fundraising, is Kamala going to be, I don't even know if you could use these funds for this purpose, but I'm now hearing a lot of speculation about her maybe being interested in the California governor job. I don't know if you're allowed to raise, this is just a factual question I don't know the answer to, if you can raise money for your presidential campaign and then use it on some gubernatorial campaign. I am shocked, if it's true, that she is really still interested in being in politics. I think after you've been vice president, anything but running for president again would be a dramatic step down. I would have expected her to become a visiting fellow of politics or something at Harvard, or have a Netflix show, or just be a commentator and book writer and speech giver. I can't imagine still wanting to be in politics after all this. But what I'm hearing is that she is seriously interested maybe in that role as a stepping stone to running again. Have you heard anything of this nature?
I definitely don't think we've seen the last of Kamala Harris on a ballot.
Really?
And I hear what you're saying, Robby. However, being governor of California is not quite like being governor of any state. It is the fifth largest economy in the world. You have immense powers of appointment, and being the chief executive of a state that large could be, I think, very intoxicating. So I'm not terribly surprised.
But you have to work hard. You have to actually do things. This is not, there's no lie, it's probably a harder, more difficult, certainly more demanding job than being vice president. Vice president is chiefly a kind of comms role, is a representing the administration and speaking through its priorities. If you're governor of California, look at what Gavin Newsom is having to do now. You have to coordinate an actual natural disaster response. It's a gigantic state. It just seems like, not that she's unwilling to do work or something, it just seems like a dramatic escalation of duties for a slightly less prestigious gig. Do you know what I mean?
I hear what you're saying, but she was also Attorney General. That is her.
Well, that's hard work too, but now she did the more glamorous role, and then you're going to roll up your sleeve. I know she says, we love work, whatever, but...
Well, having been on the front lines of both a governor and a presidential administration, I would say both are very, very hard work.
All right, tell us what you think. Do you expect to see more Kamala Harris taking an active role in politics? We shall see. More Rising right after this. Outgoing FBI Director Christopher Wray sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes on Sunday night in his first public conversation since announcing his resignation last month.
Wray's resignation came after President-elect Donald Trump announced he would nominate loyalist and former federal prosecutor Kash Patel for the job. Remember, Patel has said he would shut down the FBI building on day one and reopen it as a museum of the deep state.
Wray told 60 Minutes what he believes is the biggest threat facing the incoming Trump administration.
Well, the greatest long-term threat facing our country, in my view, is represented by the People's Republic of China, the Chinese government, which I consider to be the defining threat of our generation. China's cyber program is by far and away the world's largest, bigger than that of every major nation combined. Chinese government's pre-positioning on American civilian critical infrastructure to lie in wait on those networks, to be in a position to wreak havoc.
Let's remember, Wray was named to the FBI by President-elect Trump in his last term, in 2017. Trump soured on him because of his nonpartisan handling of January 6th. Wray took a jab at Trump, saying facts are important.
Our job as investigators at the FBI is to follow the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And I add that last part because one of the things that I've seen over my 7.5 years as FBI director is that people often claim to be very interested in independence and objectivity until independence and objectivity lead to an outcome they don't like.
And he defended the FBI.
I do take very seriously attacks against our people in the FBI. And I will tell you that the FBI that I see every single day is 38,000 career law enforcement professionals. Not one of them is a political appointee, not one of them. And they tackle the job with a level of rigor and tenacity and professionalism and objectivity that I think is unparalleled.
Conservative commentator Cash Lauren reacted to the interview on X, writing, "Disgraced FBI Director Chris Wray waited until a week before he was forced into retirement to drop this bombshell on China. Where was the FBI then in the last 4 years, and why are we only hearing about it now?" Writer Matt Fleming posted, "Chris Wray is a traitor. In fact, no one did more to, 1, allow the attack on the Capitol to happen, than 2, cover it up." So this is not a popular figure with the MAGA base, certainly someone who has presided over an FBI that is increasingly disliked by conservatives for some reasons that I think are legitimate. The weaponization of law enforcement, the failures by intelligence agencies in recent years to actually be neutral and to engage in politics, like the Hunter Biden laptop story being described by many former intelligence security experts as Russian of Russian origin. We now know it was not of Russian origin. The FBI, actually, unlike other intelligence agencies, I appreciate, puts more stock in the lab leak theory of COVID's origins than other intelligence gathering agencies. But one of the things that Kash Patel has said that he wants to do when he comes in, and this I agree with, is look at, is there duplicative work being done? Why is the FBI doing sort of national security, international threat monitoring that is properly the purview of state or DNI or something? And is that being turned on the American people to do surveillance of them? So that's the kind of thing that I know people on the right want to see the reforms happen under Kash Patel.
You know, Robby, I think what happens when people actually go into these positions and serve, they realize how hard they are. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to be on the outside looking in and to have opinions about what you think the processes are and who you think the quote-unquote deep state in their parlance is. Mm-hmm. But then when you're there, I mean, you heard Christopher Wray say it, 38,000 hardworking civil servants, you know, round the clock trying to keep us safe. I think it changes who you are and how you think about things. That's one thing. The second thing, though, is that while I think it is absolutely legitimate for any incoming political leadership to take a look at what's happening, try to make things better, the truth is once you actually are there, it's very difficult to change things in any significant way. So we'll see how far he gets on those fronts.
Well, hearings for Trump's cabinet picks are kicking off this week. Some, like Marco Rubio, who's been tapped for Secretary of State, are expected to see smooth confirmations.
You may want to bring popcorn for some others. Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, for example, will face harsh questioning on Tuesday. A hearing for John Ratcliffe, who was picked to lead the CIA, has yet to be announced.
I predict all of the nominees will be confirmed. I think the one who is maybe not going to get confirmed, Matt Gaetz, who bowed out of the race for Attorney General, I think the rest of them are going to be confirmed. There was, Pete Hegseth was having a little bit of difficulty, not actually based on, it sounds like, anything he believes in terms of the role he would serve as in Defense Secretary, but because of some past personal behavior. It sounds like he has sufficiently addressed those issues with several Republicans, including the ones who are most likely to oppose him. And I have no doubt Democrats are going to vote like universally against him and maybe some of these other nominees. They're not going to vote universally against Marco Rubio, even though that's the one I like the least because I don't agree with him ideologically and I care more about person's views than their sordid personal dating history or whatever is the case in Pete Hegseth. But I'm interested to see the candidates answer questions about about what kind of policies they're going to implement and if they're actually going to deliver on some of the promises they've made to the conservative base in terms of ramping down surveillance and bureaucracy. And like you said, it is difficult because you get in there and you have a million different priorities and these giant, massive bureaucratic apparatus that Republicans are always promising to get in there and cut waste, fraud, and abuse and eliminate unnecessary positions and bring down the federal workforce and close down departments and agencies. All of that, music to my ears, never seems to quite happen, but maybe this time will be different.
Well, that's the joke, right? Show me the line item in any budget document that
Right.
is waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right.
It's much more difficult to unravel than one would expect. But I think you're right, Robby. I think that the vast majority, if not all of these nominees will be confirmed. I think we're looking at 13 this week. Yeah. And that's not a commentary, though, in my opinion, on their viability in terms of their expertise, et cetera. It's that it is highly unusual. Nominees don't want to be voted down. They would remove themselves from the process beforehand. All that said, I do think it's going to be very interesting. Nomination hearings are always an opportunity for the opposition to do a little bit of a dog and pony show and try to ask tough questions for the record that maybe can resurface later.
It was interesting. I saw the Washington Post put together a chart of all the Trump appointees that need Senate confirmation, where they gave a thumbs up and thumbs down. And they actually said yes to most of them, with a rationale being like, look, we would not actually pick any of these people, but here are the ones we think, given a Republican administration, are qualified. And the only ones they said no to were the ones I liked the best: Kash Patel and Tulsi, and I think RFK Jr. And I'm like, those are the ones mainstream media, progressive-leaning Democratic operatives don't want. Maybe that speaks for itself.
I think it's very clear that the Republican members of the Senate are very loyal to Donald Trump. And you might see one opposition vote, but you would not see more than one.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll see what happens this week in some of these confirmation hearings. Should be some interesting content. More Rising right after this. Tech billionaire Mark Zuckerberg had some surprising things to say on Joe Rogan's podcast over the weekend. Here's Zuckerberg discussing the Biden administration's censorship during the COVID era.
These people from the Biden administration would call up our team and scream at them and curse, and it's like these documents it's all kind of out there.
Did you record any of those phone calls?
I don't think we but I think
I want to listen.
I mean, there are emails. the emails are published. It's all kind of out there. They wanted us to take down this meme of Leonardo DiCaprio looking at a TV talking about how 10 years from now or something, you're going to see an ad that says, okay, if you took a COVID vaccine, you're eligible for, for this kind of payment, this sort of class action lawsuit type meme. And they're like, no, you have to take that down. And we just said, no, we're not going to take down humor and satire. We're not going to take down things that are true. All these different agencies and branches of government basically just started investigating, coming after our company. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Zuckerberg has also been shifting his company's policies lately. For instance, Axios first reported last week that Meta was ending its major DEI programs. Zuckerberg also announced that he was ending Facebook fact-checking and heading towards a model like Community Notes. Take a look at this interesting timeline leading up to Zuckerberg's apparent about-face. In November, Zuckerberg dined with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. The next month, he donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. Then, in January, he ended Meta's fact-checking program and tapped Dana White for a Meta board position.
Here's what Zuckerberg had to say about getting rid of those fact-checkers.
It was just never accepted by people broadly. I think people just felt like the fact-checkers were too biased. Not necessarily even so much in what they ruled, although sometimes I think people would disagree with that. A lot of the time, it was just what types of things they chose to even go and fact-check in the first place. So I kind of think after having gone through that whole exercise, it I don't know, it's something out of 1984, one of these books where it's just it really is a slippery slope. And it just got to a point where it's just, okay, this is destroying so much trust, especially in the United States, to have this program.
On X, Barstool Sports founder Dave Portnoy wrote, Zuckerberg is such a spineless jellyfish. Somebody from Biden's team, unnamed, told his team to take stuff down, so he rolled over. Trump gets elected, and suddenly he's a new man.
Founder of America's Frontline Doctors, Dr. Simone Gold, jumped in writing, "Wow, Mark Zuckerberg admits that the Biden administration demanded that Facebook actively censor and take down true posts about COVID-19 vaccine side effects. Many lives could have been saved if they simply allowed the truth. This was criminal." So in that interview with Joe Rogan, Mark Zuckerberg alludes to communications from federal bureaucrats from numerous agencies, including from the CDC. I've published, I've written at various points those emails. I obtained them, I've shared them, I've seen them. Longtime viewers will probably remember my past monologues about them. You can look for them if you haven't seen them. It is absolutely the case that those emails were insane to my knowledge, the degree to which the CDC tried to shape censorship policy at Meta. Going well beyond things that, like, taking down fraudulent quack cures or whatever for COVID. We would agree that that stuff should be moderated, but to things like including the lab leak theory of the origins of COVID, something that is now not controversial, that agencies, including the FBI and the Energy Department, think is true. If you wrote the words lab leak on Facebook, they would get taken down. Lots of legitimate disagreements about whether mandates for vaccines or for masks were effective, or how much social distancing is effective, what level of mass protection is even effective. These are hotly debated subjects. They're still debated today. Anthony Fauci eventually came out and said he basically made up the 6 feet of social distancing rule on the spot. These were things that, in my view, heavy-handed moderation, because of these fact-checking organizations, the conversations were not able to be taking place on Facebook. So it's been very heartening, to my mind, to hear Zuckerberg admit that, yeah, we wish we hadn't done that. We felt pressure from the government, and now we think that was wrong. And if it happened again, we wouldn't listen to them.
Well, very clear where you stand on these
Yes,
free
it is.
speech ideas, Robby. I think that it makes sense that you should have as much information as possible out there for people of good conscience to consume and do with as they will. The thing is, we don't live in a world where the misinformation and disinformation that you and I were talking about earlier is absent. The fact is, people were clearly online trying to dissuade individuals from life-saving vaccines in a really significant way at a time when literally millions of Americans and people around the world were losing their lives. I'm not here to defend whatever actions took place from the Biden administration perspective. I wasn't part of it at that particular moment, and I wasn't on that team. But I do think that the concerns were so heightened and so real, and emotions were running really high, and my assumption is that's what was coming across in these conversations. Not that I condone anybody screaming at anybody.
But I think a lot of people on the right, or a lot of dissenters on the subject, would say that, okay, it's let's concede that it's misinformation to overplay the negative side effects or consequences of vaccines, which I agree with. I don't think the vaccines are harmful. I got vaccinated, I got boosted, etc. I've been against vaccine mandates. I've not been against the vaccines themselves. However, I think people who are skeptical of them would say, well, did anybody get called responsible for misinformation, for being incorrect about the degree to which the vaccines are going to prevent illness or the spread of COVID, right? Joe Biden himself said, get these vaccines and then you won't be having this disease. They were, I would argue, oversold in the amount of protective effect they were going to have in preventing the spread of COVID itself, right? We've all had the experience where we get vaccinated. What happens? You get COVID. I've gotten COVID 3 times. I've gotten vaccinated 5 times. It is certainly, I think, a good thing if you're an immunocompromised person or an overweight person or an older person. The protective effect against severe disease is very important. But otherwise, healthy people are not going to not get COVID because they got the vaccine. And that was a claim that was made by its advocates. That doesn't get counted as misinformation.
Well, no one should be making the claim that any vaccine that exists today is going to prevent you entirely from getting whatever the disease is. For the most part, the way vaccines work scientifically is they minimize the symptoms if you do.
Well, not the measles one, right? You get the measles vaccine, you actually
That's the only one that's been eradicated, right? But in general, the science is that it minimizes the symptoms, and that should be the argument that you're making, especially for something as devastating as COVID was at the outset of the pandemic.
Yeah. So we're moving into this new era now where the government agents are really being thrown under the bus by the heads of the social media companies. Zuckerberg is being criticized right now by some people on both sides. I've been more defensive of him, but like Democrats and progressive and left-wing people are saying, you know, he was threatened by Trump and now he's caving to this. I would say, okay, but he was threatened by the FBI and the CDC and Democrats, which is why he caved in the first place. So you can't be mad at him for caving to like not doing censorship when he caved to doing censorship in the first place. And then people on the right are saying, well, this is all very cynical. If Kamala had won, he would still be trying to be besties with Democratic administration. You know, we can't trust him. He censored us so aggressively. And to them, I would say, like, you have to, you know, you have to, when people are coming more to your way of thinking, you should be a little bit gracious and accepting, or they're not going to want to do that. So even if it's being done for cynical reasons, I agree with these policy changes. And so, like, we should just, you know, take the W, take the win.
Well, I am not a cynical person, as you now know, Robby, but I'm going to say the cynical thing.
Yeah.
This is about the bottom line.
Yeah.
And if you
well, it's
look
always
at
about the bottom
It's
line.
always about the bottom line, but this is especially about the bottom line, in the same way as it was when he swung his policies in the opposite direction, what he's dismantling now. I mean, we've seen the landscape of social media platforms change extraordinarily since the first time Barack Obama ran for president, and Twitter came into play as a real force in politics. And Facebook, much to Mark Zuckerberg's chagrin, has been in dramatic decline, as we've talked about a little bit earlier. And he, as the head of this network of entities, is taking what actions he thinks is required in order to make a real turnaround and retake dominance.
Stick around, more Rising right after this. Just when you thought the chaos at the Washington Post was slowly dwindling, we have another shakeup on our hands. That's right, Brian Stelter reports that Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin is leaving the declining newspaper.
Rubin blasted billionaire owners of media companies, including Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, telling CNN that she feared the Post was going from bad to worse. They have undercut the values central to the Post mission, and that of all journalism, integrity, courage, and independence. I cannot justify remaining at the Post. She continued, Jeff Bezos and his cronies accommodate and enable the most acute threat to American democracy, Donald Trump, at a time when a vibrant, free press is more essential than ever to our democracy's survival and capacity to thrive.
Rubin gave a pretty clear signal during her podcast last week that things weren't working out with WAPO. Here she is snubbing her own former company.
And there are good publications out there. I would point to the Philadelphia Inquirer. I would point to the Atlantic. I would point to the folks at the Bulwark. There are many good sources of information and expertise. There are also think tanks like Brookings, for example, which has all sorts of public papers, public discussions, experts. And these are the sources you're going to have to seek out in order to keep yourself informed and bat down the disinformation.
Jennifer Rubin is not a popular figure in some corners of social media, and she was relentlessly mocked for what's about to happen. Journalist Glenn Greenwald wrote, genuinely hilarious that Jen Rubin and Norm Eisen, two of the most banal people in media, are calling their new anti-Trump Substack page The Contrarian. Neither has ever expressed a single idea that's not prevailing wisdom in corporate media and establishment DC. Conservative columnist Carol Markowitz piled on, writing, first of all, every single eye roll, rather than anti-Trump, the founders described their venture as pro-democracy. But second, Jen Rubin as editor-in-chief, give that 6 months. She's abrasive and nasty. One thing to write a column with that personality, another to manage people. Washington Examiner editor Nick Claremont tweeted, news, this is satire, I have resigned, been fired from my job taking money for years from someone I now claim it is immoral to take money from. I'm starting a media company exactly like several other media companies. Our value add is that we think Trump is bad. Subscribe to the derangement.
Author of Stop the Press's newsletter, Mark Jacob, commended Rubin on Blue Sky, writing, Jen Rubin, a strong pro-democratic voice, is leaving the Washington Post and starting something called The Contrarian. Best of luck to Jen. Jeff Bezos does not deserve her.
So the idea that this is contrarian, I agree with Glenn Greenwald. You know, Jennifer Rubin is someone who was controversial at first when she joined the Washington Post because she's a conservative columnist. That's how she was billed. I think in many ways she didn't have a lot of things that were particularly conservative to say. She was like very anti-Mitt Romney, and then she was propagandistically pro-Mitt Romney. But ever since Trump came on the scene, she's just been relentlessly anti-Trump, negative toward Trump. How can your token conservative columnist be someone who hates Trump so viscerally? Just increasingly doesn't make sense, because if you're if you don't like Trump, you're just like not a conservative anymore. Like, whether you like Trump is what defines what a conservative really is. Now, mainstream news outlets hate that because they're left-leaning or progressive-leaning, and their idea of a Republican is someone who also hates Trump. Jennifer Rubin was the avatar of that. And now she's going to be joining something called the Contrarian. It's not contrarian at all to be a Republican commentator at a newspaper who hates Trump. That is like the least contrarian thing you could possibly be. That describes every Republican newspaper op-ed writer in the country.
I just love how you cannot hide your glee at this last shakeup that's happening at the Washington Post. I find it highly entertaining personally.
Good.
I mean, I think the big headline here really is about what's going on at the Washington Post. And I don't think anybody who's been paying attention since right around when they decided to pull their editorial board's endorsement of a presidential candidate or the other, nobody's surprised to see that this mass exodus is happening. There have been other really prominent names that are rumored to be taking calls and considering taking other jobs, including Phil Rucker, who's been there since he was literally an intern, Ross Helderman, and others. And I think if you look at the numbers, the Washington Post has been having some significant trouble. I mean, this all started during the first Trump administration, but even in the last few weeks, I saw some information that showed that their ad revenue, for example, has dropped $20 million one year over the other. So there are some challenges that are occurring there, and I mean, whether you take this moment to flee because you're mad about the incoming president, or you do it because you see that there's some troubles,
it's a bad environment for legacy media, even apart from the political situation. It's harder for a lot of these large media organizations to continue to be profitable, or to even attempt to be profitable with legacy costs for people who've been there a long time, with the fragmentation of the media ecosystem allowing for a lot of dissent and debate. People who served as the guardians of what you were allowed to discuss now have found themselves no longer able to enforce that line. I think the last thing the world needs is an additional media outlet, particularly an additional anti-Trump media outlet. So I'm not sure what a profitable venture this would be. I mean, isn't this market already cornered by, in fact, the publication she was mentioning? The Bulwark is like for former Republicans who hate Trump. Like, there already is such a thing. I don't know what, and it just speaks to what I would say is the ideological bankruptcy. This is truly their attitude. And, tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you agree with it. Like, failure to use enough nasty language to describe Trump is why Democrats didn't win. Like, I think that is sincerely Jennifer Rubin's belief, that like people were newspapers, mainstream media was afraid to call Trump Hitler and fascist enough, and if we'd only done even more of that, we would have stopped him from being reelected. I think that's her view, and I don't think it's accurate.
Well, I can't speak for Jennifer Rubin's view. I personally don't think
you seem
that
like
you should...
far less unhinged person.
Well, I think that you should not be calling anybody Hitler who's not Hitler. I mean, that's just bottom line for me. But I do think your point, Robby, about the proliferation of different types of outlets is a phenomenon that we're witnessing increasingly, and some of them are going to be more successful than others. I mean, remember that on the floor at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, there was all this consternation over the content creators, these individuals who have their own platforms, whether it's through TikTok or some of these other avenues for getting your voice out into the world. They had front row seats to all of the action. And I think that's both bothering legacy media, but also inspiring others, whether you like it or not, to start their own version of that.
Well, I will miss Jennifer Rubin's excited writing at the Washington Post, but there'll be other places to get it. We should talk about, because you admitted off screen to me that you're a fan of The Lord of the Rings. Which
we can talk all day about
our viewers know that I am a fan of that and of all basically nerd topics. One behind-the-scenes reasons why I think Jeff Bezos has become less hostile to Trump, or at least less willing to put up with like liberals running everything at his paper, Jennifer Rubin type people, is his dissatisfaction with what they did with the Lord of the Rings adaptation. By they, I'm meaning like left of center people. I think he doesn't like how it turned out. It's a whole conspiracy, and he's like, they screwed it up, and now I'm mad at liberals. I think that's my theory.
I don't know where to go with that, Robby, as much as I love the series.
We'll just leave it there. More Rising coming up next. California Governor Gavin Newsom is getting piled on for sitting down with Pod Save America, the podcast started by Obama's former staffers. Here's what the governor had to say.
What the president-elect was saying about state water project and the Delta smelt somehow being culpable of somehow leading to some of the challenges that we face down here was it's words. It's a salad. It's the form and substance of fog. It's made up.
Conservatives say that the Pod Save America bros have taken little time to weaponize the wildfires. This ex-post reading, quote, "If you want to help those impacted by the California wildfires, please donate at votesaveamerica.com." Appears to be a donation link to help mitigate the catastrophic LA fires, but actually it redirects people to a Democratic voter registration organization, ActBlue. National Review writer Jeff Blair called out the Pod Save Bros, posting, "They want your emails and contact info more than they want to help anyone with fire relief, is my guess."
Co-host Jon Favreau fired back, "F you. We don't bother people who donate through our relief funds. People on VSA email lists are there because they opt in or sign up. The only reason we organize relief funds this way is so people don't have to go to multiple sites to give, and we can vet all the local orgs ahead of time." Blair then responded, "I think you've been caught out, brother," to which Favreau posted, "Something you reply when you have no idea what you're talking about. It's okay to admit you just effed up and lobbed a gross accusation without checking the facts."
They are having you donate through ActBlue, says another commentator. Can't make this stuff up. CEO and co-founder of the Federalist Sean Davis reacted, "The dirtbag Obama podcast bros using the California wildfire to raise money for ActBlue." Conservative pundit Joe Concha posted, "The Obama bros are having quite the run lately. You're caught, John. Just own up to it already. Say hello to Soros." So I've looked into this, and look, it is true that if you go through the link and donate that way, most of the funds they're going to these relief organizations. But if you're doing it through this Democratic partisan voter organization, you will be they get I believe a small percentage of all of the money raised that way, and this has been alleged. I have not been able to double check this. You're then being added your information to this organization's mailing list, that kind of thing. So I think it is certainly fair to criticize them for it.
Look, Rob, I think you have to be very, very careful when you do solicitations of any kind. In fact, I have coached many a campaign staffer about how important it is to be very cautious about what you're putting out into the world and what you're claiming, especially when you're asking people to open their wallets.
Yeah.
I hear Jon Favreau's point about being a trusted messenger and vetting of organizations. This is also, of course, very true, especially in times of tragedy and crisis. A lot of public individuals, public profiles will do a thing where they pull together a list of organizations and say, hey, this is where your money will be well spent. That said, typically the way it's done is that you have a list of those organizations with a direct connection to them and whatever apparatus they may use to collect those funds.
Yeah, it just, excuse me, speaks to the politicization of the wildfires, which they're saying Gavin Newsom was on with the Pod Save America bros, saying that that's what the right is doing, and as we talked about earlier. But I think that point gets really undercut if you're on a show and the hosts of it are raising money for fire for prevention and for good causes, but is through a Democratic partisan voter organization, just really makes that politicization point, I think, sound very, very empty to people.
It's tough, and I know these guys.
Yeah.
I often believe in people's good intentions. I know these guys had good intentions. This might not have been the best process, but absolutely, they want to help.
Yeah, I don't know them at all, and they're representatives of a certain kind of ideological tendency in the Democratic Party. I think they want to be often very defensive of the Democratic Party. Now, the interview with the Kamala people that was done on Pod Save America, yes. I thought was very interesting, and they asked a pretty good question. So I have critical things to say of them and of Jon Favreau a lot, but if they do good work, I find it interesting. I think it's good that they interviewed Gavin Newsom. I think they should have pressed him a little harder on some of these things, but yes, they just ought to be more careful about the fundraising. And I'm not sure lashing out, angrily at people on the right is also the best way to address that legitimate criticism, but what do I know?
I think you're absolutely right, Robby, but I do think that it speaks to their base. I mean, the people who follow Jon Favreau, Tommy Vietor, Dan Pfeiffer, they do so because they feel like these guys not only speak the truth, but they do so with passion. So I think that really kind of serves the people that support them.
Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for watching. We're just getting started this week. We'll be back with more content tomorrow. In the meantime, you can like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of it. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get podcasts. See you later.